"She's too heavy for any horse." They laughed, but Mountain Man carried the obese girl home himself. "Leave her!" the man shouted, his voice echoing across the dry prairie. "She's too heavy for any horse." Laughter rippled through the wagon train like wildfire. Men slapped their knees, women shook their heads, and the young girl standing by the wagon, Beatrice B. Hawthorne, felt her world collapse in on itself. It was late autumn of 1881, and the settlers' caravan was crawling its way toward the frontier town of Pinewood. The sun was sinking low, spilling a red haze over the cracked earth, and the cold wind carried the scent of dust and pine. Bee's uncle, Charles Morrison, had just decided she was a burden too great to bear. "Unhitch her bag," he barked. "She walks from here." Bee's heart pounded. "Please, Uncle Charles, just a few more miles. I'll walk beside the wagon, I promise." But her aunt's sharp voice cut through her plea. "We've coddled you long enough. You eat more than 3 men and work less than 1. Laughter again, harder this time, crueler. Someone muttered, "She'll never make it. The coyotes'll get her by nightfall." Bee's throat burned as tears welled up. She tried to hold them back, but when the wagon lurched forward, leaving her on the side of the trail with only a small canvas bag and her shawl, the sob broke free. The dust from the wheels blinded her, coated her mouth. When she wiped her eyes, the caravan was already a blur in the distance, alone, unwanted, forgotten. Then, faintly at first, she heard the sound, hoofbeats, steady and strong, coming from the west. A tall figure on horseback appeared at the ridge, framed by the dying sun, broad-shouldered, silent, watching, the kind of man legends were whispered about. And that was how Beatrice Hawthorne met the mountain man who would carry her home with his own hands. Beatrice Hawthorne had never belonged anywhere. Even before her parents died of fever, people in their New Hampshire town had whispered behind her back, calling her too big, too soft, too much. After the funeral, her mother's sister, Margaret Morrison, had agreed to take her in, but only because Beatrice came with a small inheritance. Within months, the money was gone, and the kindness with it. Now, standing alone on the trail with dusk closing in, Bee realized that everything she'd known was gone too. The wagons were no more than shadows in the distance. The wind howled across the plains, tugging at her skirt. Coyotes yipped far away, and her breath hitched with fear. She pulled her shawl tighter, her fingers numb. The road to Pinewood stretched before her, miles of wilderness, ridges, and dry creek beds. No one could survive the night here alone. Then she heard it again. Hoofbeats. A dark horse broke through the mist, its rider tall and broad, his presence filling the silence like thunder. He slowed as he approached, eyes narrowing as he took in the sight of her, a large woman, tear-streaked, trembling, abandoned with nothing but a ragged bag. "Evening," he said, his voice deep and gravelly. "You lost?" Bee swallowed hard. My uncle. They left me." The man dismounted in one fluid motion, his boots landing in the dust. Up close, he was formidable. Long hair tied back with leather, a weathered coat of fur and hide, the smell of pine and smoke clinging to him. His eyes, green as moss after rain, softened as they met hers. "They left you out here alone?" She nodded. "They said I was too heavy for the horse." The man's jaw tightened. For a long moment he didn't speak. Then he said, "Name's Elijah Thornwood. Folks call me Eli. I live up the ridge by the Silver River." "I shouldn't trouble you," she murmured. "I'll find a way." He shook his head. "You won't last till sunrise on your own." Her lips trembled. Then what will you do? Your horse can't carry me. Eli studied her for a moment, then said simply, Then I'll carry you. Before she could protest, he stepped forward, his arm sliding beneath her legs and back. She gasped, instinctively gripping his shoulders. Wait, please, I'm too heavy. But he lifted her as if she weighed no more than a child. His strength was effortless, his stride steady. The horse followed quietly, as though it understood. Bee's cheek brushed against his chest, and she felt the steady rhythm of his heart beneath the layers of leather and flannel. It wasn't lust or pity she felt then. It was something deeper, something she couldn't name. He walked until the stars rose, saying nothing, the sound of his boots and the whisper of the wind filling the silence between them. Finally, she whispered, Why would you help me? You don't even know me. Eli looked down at her, his face unreadable in the moonlight. Because no one should be left behind. When they reached the clearing by the river, the moon reflected off a cabin of hand-hewn logs, a home built by one man's patience and pain. Eli set her down gently on a bench by the door, his breath visible in the cold night air. You'll be safe here, he said quietly. You can rest. For the first time in her life, Beatrice Hawthorne believed him. Bee woke the next morning to the smell of wood smoke and river air. Sunlight filtered through the cabin shutters, catching in the golden strands of dust dancing above the floor. For a moment, she forgot where she was, until she felt the weight of a thick quilt tucked around her shoulders and heard the rhythmic sound of chopping wood outside. She pushed herself upright, blinking. The room was simple but tidy. A stone hearth, shelves lined with tin cups and dried herbs, a sturdy table with a single chair. Near the door, a pair of large boots sat neatly beside a hunting knife. Eli Thornwood's home. Bee swung her legs over the side of the bed, wincing at the soreness in her muscles. She had walked miles before being abandoned, but she had never felt the kind of exhaustion that came from fear. Still, she was alive. The door creaked open, and Eli stepped in, carrying an armful of firewood. His hair was damp with dew, and sunlight flashed against the blade at his belt. "You're awake," he said, setting the wood beside the hearth. "How do you feel?" "Better," she managed. "Just heavy." He gave a small, understanding smile. "Then sit. I'll make breakfast." Bee watched him move through the cabin, his motions slow but sure. He poured water into a kettle, ground coffee beans, and stirred oats into a pot. There was a quiet grace to him, a man who needed no words to fill the space. When he handed her a tin bowl of steaming oatmeal with honey and berries, Bea hesitated. "You don't have to feed me," she said softly. "I didn't bring you here to starve," he interrupted gently. "Eat." Bea obeyed. The warmth spread through her, loosening something in her chest she hadn't realized was clenched. When she finished, she looked around. "You built all this yourself?" Eli nodded. "Took me 2 years. After the war, I needed somewhere the world couldn't find me." "The war. Union scout," he said simply, half Cheyenne, half white. "Didn't belong anywhere after it ended. So I came here." Bee studied him in silence. The lines on his face weren't just from the sun, they were carved by loneliness. Later that day, Eli showed her the stream where he caught fish and the small patch of earth he used for planting. He gave her his arm when she stumbled and said nothing when she apologized. When she insisted on helping clean the cabin, he handed her a broom without protest. By evening, Her hands were blistered, her dress streaked with dust, but she felt lighter than she had in years. Eli lit the fire, and the cabin filled with the soft glow of orange light. "You worked hard today," he said. "You didn't have to." "I wanted to," Bee replied. "I've spent most of my life being told I was useless. Feels good to prove that wrong." Eli looked at her then, not at her body, not at the weight the world had mocked, but at her eyes, where a quiet strength was beginning to spark. "I don't think you were ever useless," he said, "just unseen." The words hit deeper than he knew. Bea turned away, blinking quickly. As night fell, they sat on the porch, listening to the river whisper over the rocks. Above them, the stars burned white against the endless dark. "You don't talk much," she said. Eli smiled faintly. "Talking's what people do when they don't listen." "And what do you hear?" she asked. He looked at her, his voice barely a murmur. "A woman who's learning how to breathe again." Bee's heart ached. For the first time in her life, she wasn't invisible. She was seen. And as the firelight flickered across his face, she began to wonder, maybe being carried wasn't the same as being weak. Maybe it was the first step toward standing on her own. Days on the mountain fell into a rhythm as soft and steady as the river beside the cabin. The first snow had not yet come, but the air carried its promise. Crisp mornings, quiet evenings, and skies that glowed amber at dusk. For the first time since her parents' passing, Beatrice Hawthorne woke each morning not to insults or orders, but to silence and kindness. Eli rose before dawn. She would wake to the smell of pine smoke and see him outside splitting logs, his breath visible in the chill air. His movements were methodical, clean-cut, lift, swing, repeat, each strike of the axe echoing through the trees. Sometimes she stood at the window just to watch. There was strength in him, yes, but not violence. It was a steady, patient strength, the kind that built, not destroyed. When she offered to help with chores, Eli never refused her out of pity. He simply nodded, handed her a task, and trusted her to do it. Beatrice learned how to knead bread by the fire, how to smoke fish in the shed, how to mend fur pelts for winter. At first, her hands blistered and her back ached, but she found herself smiling through it. The work was honest, and when Eli praised her, she believed him. "You've got a steady hand," he said one evening as she stitched a tear in his coat. "Most folks would have tossed it and bought new." Bea looked up from her work. "Most folks never had to make do with what little they had." Eli's eyes softened. "You remind me of my mother. She could turn scraps into something beautiful." That night, she cooked venison stew, and when they sat together at the rough-hewn table, the air between them felt warm in a way that had nothing to do with the fire. After supper, Eli would sometimes read aloud from an old book, Shakespeare, the Bible, or a weathered volume of Whitman's Leaves of Grass. His voice was deep and rough, like gravel softened by years of solitude. Bea listened, head tilted, letting his words settle over her like the weight of a blanket. When he paused, she'd say something small, an observation, a question, and he'd smile as if no one had ever cared enough to ask. As weeks passed, laughter began to find its way into the cabin. Once, when she burned a loaf of bread black as coal, Eli had grinned and said, "Looks like we're eating bark tonight." She'd thrown a towel at him in mock outrage, laughing so hard she could barely breathe. The mountain grew colder, but inside their home, the warmth grew stronger. Eli started fixing up the second room in the cabin, the one long abandoned after his father's death. He planed wood for shelves, patched the roof, and built a sturdy bed frame. When Bea asked what he was doing, he said simply, "Seems this place could use a woman's touch for a while." Bea's heart skipped. She wasn't sure if he meant forever, but the thought alone was enough to make her blush. One morning, she found him struggling to repair a broken latch on the barn door. Without a word, she joined him, holding the wood steady while he hammered it into place. Their hands brushed rough skin against soft, and for a second neither moved. The air between them tightened, something unsaid, but deeply understood. That evening, as the sky dimmed into indigo, they sat on the porch with mugs of coffee, watching the fireflies rise over the river. Bea tucked her shawl tighter around her shoulders. Eli looked at her, his gaze lingering. "You've changed this place," he said quietly. "It used to feel empty. Now it feels like home." She met his eyes, her voice barely a whisper. "Maybe it's not the place that changed." He smiled faintly. "Maybe it's the both of us." For the first time, she didn't look away. Inside, the firelight glowed against the walls, casting their shadows close together. In the hush of the mountain night, with the sound of the river beyond and the scent of pine in the air, Beatrice Hawthorne began to believe that love could grow from silence, that even the heaviest hearts could find their place to rest. Winter crept down the mountain slowly, whispering through the pines and coating the riverbank in frost. Life in the cabin had become peaceful. Too peaceful, perhaps, for two souls who had both learned that peace never lasts. One evening, as Bea stirred a pot of rabbit stew, Eli returned from a trip to the valley town below. His coat was dusted with snow, and his expression was darker than she'd seen in months. He hung his rifle by the door, but his eyes didn't meet hers. "What happened?" she asked softly. "Nothing that won't pass." She set down the spoon. "Eli." He sighed, rubbed a hand over his jaw. "Your uncle, Morrison, he's back in Pinewood." Bea froze. "What?" Eli nodded grimly. "He's been spreading talk. Said you stole from him. Said I abducted you. Sheriff's listening. Folks don't need much reason to believe a story when it fits their comfort." Bea's hands trembled. "He left me to die. He can't twist that into—" "He can," Eli interrupted, voice calm but heavy. "Men like him don't care about truth. They care about pride." Bea turned away, pressing a hand to her mouth. "He'll come here, won't he?" Eli's eyes flicked to the window, where the first flakes of snow drifted past. "Maybe, but he won't find a frightened girl this time." For days afterward, a quiet tension filled the cabin. Eli spent long hours chopping wood, checking his traps, repairing the fence, his movements sharper, more deliberate. Bea saw the haunted look in his eyes return, the same one he'd worn when he told her about the war. That night, as the wind howled outside, she found him sitting by the fire, turning a silver locket in his hands. She recognized it instantly. It wasn't hers. "Eli?" she whispered. "What's that?" He didn't answer at first. Then, with a voice roughened by old wounds, he said, "It belonged to my wife." Bea sat down across from him. The firelight flickered between them. "I thought she died in childbirth," she said carefully. "She did," he murmured, "but not before telling me the truth." He looked up then, eyes shadowed with grief. "The child wasn't mine. She'd been seeing a soldier while I was away. When the fire took the cabin, part of me thought it was justice. The other part never stopped blaming myself. Bee's chest tightened. "Eli, I built this cabin to forget," he continued. "But then you came, and I realized forgetting isn't the same as healing." Tears burned behind Bee's eyes. She reached across the space between them and took his hand. "You didn't save me because I reminded you of her," she said. "You saved me because you're good." He looked at her for a long time, then squeezed her hand once, firmly. "I don't know what I deserve, Bee, but I know what I'll protect." The knock came 2 days later. Eli was already on his feet before the echo died. He opened the door to find 2 men, Sheriff Cole and another behind him, older, meaner, her uncle. "Evening, Thornwood," the sheriff said. "We've had a complaint filed. Says you're keeping a young woman here against her will." Bee stepped forward before Eli could speak. "That's a lie." Morrison's lip curled. "Beatrice, you're confused. Come home. You're family." She met his gaze, steady and unflinching. "Family doesn't leave you to die." The sheriff's eyes flicked between them, uncertain. "You married, miss?" Eli reached for the drawer by the door, took out a folded piece of paper, and handed it to him. "Certificates, signed by Reverend Howard in Mill Creek. She's my wife." The sheriff studied it, then gave a slow nod. "That's legal enough," Morrison sputtered. "This is madness. She's—" Eli's voice cut through the air like a blade. "She's mine to protect, not yours to shame. Leave this mountain before the storm hits. I won't ask twice." The older man hesitated, looked between Bee's calm defiance and Eli's unwavering stance, and finally turned away. The 2 men mounted their horses and disappeared into the snow. When silence returned, Bee's legs gave out. Eli caught her before she fell. "I was so scared," she whispered. "I know," he said, pulling her close, "but you didn't run this time." She looked up at him, tears and snow mingling on her lashes. "Neither did you." Outside, the storm began to fall in earnest, thick flakes swirling like ashes reborn. Inside, by the fire, 2 wounded souls finally stood as equals. The snowstorm raged for 3 days straight. Wind screamed through the pines, rattling the shutters and piling drifts high against the cabin walls. Inside, the fire burned day and night, casting a golden glow over the small space that had become their entire world. Eli had reinforced the door and checked every rifle twice, but he couldn't shake the unease gnawing at him. "Men like your uncle don't walk away," he muttered. "They regroup." Bee tried to stay calm, but her stomach twisted each time the wind changed direction. "We've done nothing wrong," she said. Eli gave her a faint, grim smile. "Out here, right and wrong don't always matter. Only who's left standing does." On the 3rd night, as the storm eased into silence, the sound came. Hooves crunching snow, faint but deliberate. Eli rose, motioning Bee toward the back room. She hesitated, but his look told her not to argue. He grabbed his rifle and stepped to the window. 2 figures emerged from the tree line, cloaked and shadowed. One dismounted and began to move toward the cabin. Morrison. "Stay inside," Eli ordered softly. Bee's heart pounded. "Don't hurt him, Eli, please." "I won't, unless he gives me reason." The door creaked open to reveal Morrison, face twisted with cold and fury. "You think you can steal my blood and walk away?" he spat. "She belongs to me. Always did." Eli didn't move. "She doesn't belong to anyone." "You think she'll stay once she sees what you are?" Morrison sneered. "A half-breed savage living off scraps?" Eli's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed low. "I've heard worse from better men. You should leave." Morrison drew his pistol. Not without her. The world narrowed to the space between them, the firelight, the snow, the breath between heartbeats. Then a voice broke through it. "Stop!" Bee burst through the doorway, barefoot on the cold floor, her shawl slipping from her shoulders. She stepped between them, her body trembling, but her gaze steady. "You want to kill someone, Uncle?" she said, her voice raw but unwavering. "Then shoot me, because I will never go back with you." Morrison faltered. For the first time, she saw doubt flicker across his face. Eli lowered his rifle slightly, eyes fixed on her. "Bea!" But she kept going, her voice rising with years of buried pain. "You called me a burden, a shame. You left me to die because I didn't fit your idea of worth. Well, I found someone who sees me, who loves me, and I'm not hiding anymore." Morrison's arm shook. Then slowly he lowered the gun. "You've changed," he muttered, almost to himself. "No," Bee said softly. "You just never looked." He turned, mounted his horse, and disappeared into the storm. When he was gone, Bee's strength broke. Eli caught her as she collapsed against him, holding her tight. "It's over," he murmured into her hair. "You did it." She looked up, tears glittering like frost. "No, we did." Outside, the last of the snow drifted down in silence, covering the tracks that led away from their home. Inside, two people, once abandoned, once broken, found the peace they had been denied by the world. And as the fire burned low, Eli whispered against her ear, "You're safe now. You're home." Spring crept back to the mountains like a shy visitor, melting the last of the snow, filling the streams, and waking the forest with bird-song. The long, cruel winter had passed, leaving behind a world washed clean and new. Bee stood by the riverbank one morning, the hem of her dress brushing the grass, watching the water rush past. Her reflection shimmered in the current, fuller, softer, smiling. For the first time in her life, she liked what she saw, not because she had changed, but because she had stopped apologizing for existing. Eli came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. His beard brushed her cheek, warm and gentle. "Snow's gone," he said softly. "Cabin's almost dry. We'll start planting soon." She leaned back into him, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. "It feels strange," she whispered. "After everything, it feels quiet." "Quiet's good," he murmured. "Quiet means we survived." They walked back to the cabin hand in hand. The garden beds had been cleared, the smokehouse rebuilt. On the porch, their two pups, rescued from a half-frozen den, chased each other in clumsy circles. Life had found its way back, just as they had. That evening, as the sun bled gold across the ridges, Bee set 2 bowls of stew on the table and lit a single candle. Eli reached for her hand. "I carried you once through the storm," he said, smiling, "but I think you're the one who carried me the rest of the way." Bee's eyes glistened in the flickering light. "Then we'll keep carrying each other," she whispered, "no matter how heavy the world gets." Outside, the river sang. Inside, the cabin glowed, proof that even the heaviest hearts could find a home strong enough to hold them. Every time I read stories like this, I'm reminded that love isn't about perfection. It's about presence. It's about the people who choose to stay when the rest of the world walks away. If Beatrice and Eli's story touched your heart, tell me where you're listening from. Whether it's a quiet mountain town, a crowded city, or somewhere in between, stories like this connect us across every distance. And if you still believe that kindness and loyalty can heal even the deepest wounds. Don't leave yet. The next story is waiting for you. Another tale of courage, redemption, and love that never gives up.